and welcome to Business PNG, your weekly look at business news and updates. The Papua New Guinea Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry recently hosted a roundtable discussion in Port Moresby. The topic of the discussion was the government's small to medium enterprises policy. Many of the Chamber's members feel that the SME policy doesn't fully represent female SME owners and entrepreneurs.
The first forum held by the Papua New Guinean Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Port Moresby has identified few loopholes in the government's first draft of the Small to Medium Enterprise or SME policy. This draft policy was described by the Chamber as silent on women's financial needs, and members of PNG WCCI would like to see another policy created to include women's needs.
Whether those two, the policy and the Act, both, where do they fit into the SME, the current draft SME policy? Because it appears that that particular informal sector policy and the National Informal Sector Act have not been considered in the current draft.
The forum held in Port Moresby has brought together representatives from the various organizations in the country. They include Banks of Pacific, Australian Eye Commission, and local women entrepreneurs. The meeting was aimed at creating an avenue for women to discuss a way forward in developing skills for women entrepreneurs in PNG.
Discussion with government on whether or not there should be an SME policy separate for women entrepreneurs. In this discussion, in these recommendations, there's been a recommendation also made for us to have a task force or a business advisory group that advises government on the SME policy for women and also on other incidental and related issues regarding the development of women entrepreneurs in Papua New Guinea.
In a collective recommendation, the women have spoken openly on the challenges they face as entrepreneurs. This includes the access to finance and information, cultural attitudes towards women, and the lack of established government agencies to support women entrepreneurs. PNG WCCI and its panelists were privileged to have Samila Hamid as their guest speaker. Samila is the founder of the Bangladesh Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry and has trained over 700,000 women entrepreneurs in Bangladesh. Samila believes also the draft SME policy has lacked specific women needs.
I think women into the SME policy should be included as a very important segment and to a separate policy.
While addressing the difficulties these women face in accessing finance, BSP Bank Manager for Small Business Dennis Konu explained that accessing finance from any given bank is done on a trust basis. He said while it is their role to support business activities in the country financially, the bank needs to make profit for their transactions.
One of the most important things that banks sort of consider when they give loans is that they want to get back their money. So they're looking for repayments. From our own experience, what we find is, and this is not just restricted to a specific gender, but it's across the board with small businesses, is that default rates tend to be quite high, and we sort of see that one of the main sort of contributing factors to that is the lack of management capacity within the individual customer themselves. So
PNG WCCI believes points identified in item 5.2 of the draft policy give it the right to create a framework that will support women in PNG. With this right stated in the draft policy, the women entrepreneurs want to execute this right before the draft is finally presented to the cabinet. They want to see equal chances given to women.
We now have a policy, but we need to get the players around the table, like we banks. We read the policy itself, and then we get back to the government what our thoughts are. Because our mother bank, which is Bank of PNG, is the one that should be critical in deciding on the interest rates and bank fees and all that.
It is the desire for PNG WCCI to see another policy created to accommodate the needs of these women entrepreneurs. Other comments raised included the creation of a new and proper policy that will state the graduating points for the entrepreneurs from medium levels to commercial levels. These women have also questioned the government on the set boundaries on which protects the kinds of products they produce and the kind of products imported into PNG that are identical in nature to what the PNG women have produced.
One of the things that we're also doing and would like to do is to advocate for policies and also for the development of private sector policy in banking and financial institutions, as well as in public sector, in government, to push and drive and advocate for policies that will be drafted, making it favorable for women at the workplace and also as business owners.
6 points were raised as a recommendation from the roundtable discussions.
I think all in all, certain recommendations have been made for us to take up and to put into some formal letter and take up to the government to include and to consider in the final drafting of the SME policy. And yes, I think what's the main thing that we have been able to achieve in this morning's roundtable conference is bringing together stakeholders and being able to develop, forge the way forward to have some synergy between private sector and government to address the challenges that women entrepreneurs are facing in Papua New Guinea.
In the meantime, PNG WCCI, though affiliated to the PNG Chamber of Commerce and Industry, is yet to be registered within the Department of Trade, Commerce and Industry. Once it is formally registered, the Chamber will make Papua New Guinea the second country after Australia in the South Pacific region to have a Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
After the break, we hear from New Zealand's first Minister for State-Owned Enterprises, Richard Prebble, about what PNG's SOEs can learn from SOEs in other countries and emulate their successes. Don't go anywhere. Engaging the private sector through public-private partnerships and privatization can improve the performance and service delivery of state-owned enterprises. This is according to a new Asian Development Bank report called Finding Balance 2014, benchmarking the performance of state-owned enterprises in island countries. Richard Prebble, New Zealand's first Minister of State-Owned Enterprise, one of the architects of New Zealand's SOE reform program, which is internationally recognized as being one of the most comprehensive and successful programs ever undertaken, sits with Business PNG to discuss how PNG can replicate New Zealand's success and the way forward.
Welcome back to the studio. With me, Richard Prebble. Richard, I'm going to describe as the last Postmaster General for New Zealand and the first Minister for State-Owned Enterprises. Welcome to Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea, Richard.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, you're a bit concerned that we wouldn't ask you back, but after the entertaining presentation today, I think you can come back anytime, my friend. So. Oh,
that's very kind. I sometimes tell it like it is, and people say thanks very much, but they don't ask me back.
I was talking about last Postmaster General because you led New Zealand out of I think fairly straitened economic times. A massive look at the economy, and part of that was looking at the state-owned enterprises. And you've been at this Chamber breakfast, you've been talking about finding balance, looking at the Pacific, looking at island stations' performance, island nations' performance in the state-owned enterprises. What was the key message that you were trying to sell today?
The key message I'm trying to sell is that the performance of the government-owned businesses is very, very important. Because if you think about it, here in Papua New Guinea, they're on the ports, they're on the airports, they're on the power, they're on the water. Every single person is affected by that. And if they run them well, then Papua New Guinea's standard of living goes up. And if they run badly, then Papua New Guinea's standard of living falls. So it's vital.
The report was a benchmarking report. Who were benchmarking against?
What happened was that the Pacific ministers got together and said, can we share information? And so it's the countries across the Pacific. Papua New Guinea is the biggest that's in the survey, and they go all the way down to Little Tonga. There's Samoa's in it, the Solomons is in it, the Marshall Islands is in the survey. And this one, for the first time, they included 3 non-Pacific countries: Jamaica, Mauritius, and Cape Verde.
Yeah.
I had to look in the atlas to find out where Cape Verde was.
Well, I still have to work that out. I was wondering why you included Jamaica, because the results there were pretty horrific.
Because they asked to be.
Asked to be horrific or asked to be in the report?
Well, probably both. But now this report the ADB's done is a world first. People hadn't thought about benchmarking, and countries around the world are extremely interested in it. And those 3 countries said to the ADB, we've got real problems in our state-owned enterprises. The Pacific's doing better than us, and the survey shows that we are. And they said, look, let's join and see if we can pick up some lessons.
So how did PNG come out of the report?
Good and bad. And the good is that PNG's state-owned enterprises are some of the best in the Pacific, and we're at least earning a positive on our assets. The disappointing is...
What sort of figure are these? When you say positive, are we highly positive or barely positive?
Barely positive.
Barely, yeah.
And some state-owned enterprises in Papua New Guinea aren't. They are not earning even their cost of capital. Well, if you're not earning your cost of capital, I don't think you have to be a business person to realise that. That means you can't invest in new infrastructure.
It's not the businessman. So for the man in the street, what does that mean? Is it just good money after bad?
Well, it could do, but I'll just take an example that I did use, which was PNG Power. PNG Power is not earning enough money to be able to have the new capital that they need to run an efficient power service. And everyone can see that because we've got power cuts every day. Yes. Now, part of my unpopular message is look, the power price is too low. And if you are setting power prices politically, and you're setting them too low, you have the advantage of lower power bills, but think of the damage that happens to all your appliances when the power goes in and off. That's actually very bad for you. But on the other hand, I had a couple of tough messages for PNG Power saying there are things they can do to improve their performance.
Yeah. You've been here for a couple of days, and it's not the first time. What's your sense? Are we for this or against this SOE reform?
Oh no, your government does understand how vital this is. Okay. They decided to join this benchmark exercise. They knew this information was going to come out. What they're looking to is to you, the viewers, so that people can be informed and help them make the decisions they want to make.
Minister Michael was there this morning and spoke quite positively.
And he did, and he spoke positively. The government is actually making good strides. And one of the things I'm saying here is, look, they need support from business. Business needs to support the government to make these changes that are required.
In the business community, there's a bit of a dichotomy. Some people want full privatisation, some want partial. What would you say to them in the PNG context? Is that realistic to go the full hog?
I'm not here to be able to make a political judgment.
No.
But I can only make you an overall judgment. In fact, look at this benchmark. The benchmark actually has looked at countries in the Pacific that have done full privatisation,
yes,
and the results are spectacular. One example they give, and I know this example, is the slipyard in Tulagi in the Solomons. I actually went and visited a few years ago with the then Prime Minister of the Solomons, and the shipyard was in such a bad condition that all they had was employees. They couldn't actually fix any truck. And he said to me, what should you do? And I said, sell it. Now someone else came along who was more persuasive than me, and the government sold it. And you think, who on earth would buy a slipyard in that condition? Well, they did, They fixed it, and it's now a bigger employer than it ever was under the government, and it's making a good profit, and it's enabling ships, not just in the Solomons, but in the neighbouring Pacific countries, to be repaired in the Pacific. There are businesses here in Papua New Guinea that have never made a dollar, that actually, if the government put them for sale, the private sector would come along and say, I think I know how to manage this better, I can manage it better, I can lower the costs, and I can provide a service. So I'm actually in favour of full privatisation, but if you can't do that,
that's a different issue.
Yeah, but if you can't do that, then partial privatisation has advantages, because private sector investors, they're going to be on the case of the managers saying, hey, you need to improve your performance. But having said all that, you've got to be careful. I would never sell an unregulated government monopoly, because that's a license to print money.
Yes.
And thank you very much, but no, I wouldn't do that.
You talked about some of the myths that get thrown up in this debate, and we get it in Papua New Guinea. We don't have the resources, we don't have the people. It's almost like we can't do it, so government has to do it. Was that a myth that the report exploded?
It most certainly does. And I think it's one of the reasons why finance ministers right around the Pacific are so interested.
Okay.
Because who would have predicted that the most efficient state-owned enterprises in the Pacific are in Tonga? Tonga's a very poor country. I mean, it's probably one of the 10 poorest countries in the world, and yet they've got the most efficient state-owned enterprises of any Pacific country. I mean, if Tonga can do it, Papua New Guinea most certainly can do it. So that blows that myth out. The other one that's a myth is, look, we don't have enough private sector directors. Well, you can look around Papua New Guinea, and I can do this because I was here 40 years ago. There's some pretty smart people here, because, gee whiz, to me, this country has made huge strides, and it's my experience that when you go to those private sector directors as a minister and say, look, I want you to help me with the power company, they won't want to do that because it's a big hunk of their time, but I've never been turned down. And I think that Papua New Guinea businessmen are nationalists as well, and they won't be turned down.
Of course they are. I think the problem is we don't get asked.
That's right.
I thought comments from the Minister today were quite positive.
Sure, but I made the other point, and maybe I'm wrong, you can tell me wrong, but I was saying to the Chamber,
yes,
hey, how many people have you nominated? And you should nominate, you should help the Minister, and that helps them, because I've been there, right? Yeah. I've been the minister, and everybody wanted to be the director of Air New Zealand.
Yes,
right?
I'm sure they did.
Oh, yes, they did. They had this idea that they might be able to fly around and see how it was doing. And it was very helpful when I was getting people being nominated by our chamber.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think in response to that, I would say we feel we need to be asked, and it's kind of hard to say, look, we'd like to. I mean, we can certainly in the press say that. One of the issues in the past has been we will get a request from government, give us 3 names, give us 5 names, and we've always tended to say, well, look, this is not a popularity contest. Here's our nominee. We don't think we should be, you pick who you like.
Well, what a couple of organisations in New Zealand have done is actually looked through their membership, taken some CVs, yes, and actually submitted it to the government and said, here are 20 of our members who we think are competent and able. Here's their record. Have a look. And I know that the government actually finds that very helpful.
Okay, we'll take your advice on that one. Thank you.
And if I might make a comment,
yes,
if there's any women's group looking,
of course,
they should do the same thing. We need more women directors, but if you need, and many people don't want to nominate themselves,
No.
So having some other organisation.
Well, we now have a women's chamber, we now have a business coalition for women, so yeah, I mean, I think we can certainly incentivise all of them to do exactly as you've said. Well, moving on, we talked about the government's just recently invoked PPP legislation, which I think we're all very happy about. I know that the Asian Development Bank certainly are very happy because this has been trolling on for 4 or 5 years now, so that's very positive. You mentioned an example wearing your other hat as a director of Hawkins Infrastructure. PPPs in schools, that surprised me a little bit. We tend to think it's bridges and roads and ports and things, but PPPs in schools, tell me that story.
Well, in New Zealand we've got I think we have a terrible saga because the way the schools had been built was by tender. They took the cheapest product, and the government's had a look at its schools and realised they've got huge maintenance problems. So they said, well, let's try the PPP, the public-private partnership, and they tendered out 2 schools to be built, and I'm a director of Hawkins, and we put our money in, and we built schools for the government before and said to them, we don't think much of this design, and we were told, do as you're told, build this building. In this case, under the PPP, we had to not only build the school, but manage it for 20 years, and then hand it over to the government. So we turned the government's model on its head. We picked the best architect, picked the best subcontractors, picked the best materials, and built the best possible school so we would have a low maintenance cost. The school's delighted. You know, the teachers just think it's the best thing since sliced bread. The kids like it, the parents like it, but the government loves it. And it's now putting out, I think 5 more schools to be built by PPP, and I would think in New Zealand the future, I would think, will be PPPs. This report looks at some PPPs in the Pacific and comes out very strongly in favour of public-private partnerships. And the point that I would make is this, which is a bit stronger than the report. State-owned enterprises have an awful record right around the world in major infrastructure proposals. I've seen one study done in Britain comparing state-owned enterprises building major infrastructures, and almost none were built on time, none to budget, and almost none did what they were supposed to do. Then they compared it to the PPPs, and most of them are built on time, to budget, and actually do what they're supposed to do, because if they don't, it's the private sector, not the taxpayer, that loses.
One last piece of advice, if I may. I mean, in the recent announcement of the privatisation of PNG Power, the attitude of the workers in the entity, and in fact in PNG Power, one of their demands was, well, quite rightly, that their entitlements be paid out. I don't see any problems with that. That should happen anyway. But that they be given 15% of the entity. What would you have said in New Zealand?
I said to them, no. I said, this entity belongs to the taxpayer, and I'm not, as a politician, I'm the trustee, and I'm not giving away a single dollar of the taxpayers' money to anyone, including the employees. What I did say is, look, if the employees want to get together and put in a bid, good luck. You'll be considered along with everyone else. And there's an example in this benchmark study of Samoa Broadcasting. And Samoa Broadcasting had been running at a loss. They put it up for privatisation. The management put in a bid. And blow me down, once they are actually owning it and running it, it's now profitable. It has now more hours. It's extended its coverage. And that shows that I'm sure that the government here wouldn't mind a bid by the PNG.
But you're not going to give it to them for nothing?
Well, me, I wouldn't, no, because it's not mine to give away. It belongs to the public.
Richard, we could talk for hours on this. It's a fascinating subject, and obviously lovely to share your experiences. Last question, is Papua New Guinea stuck with its SOEs?
Do I think we're always going to have SOEs? Yes, I do. And there I differ a little with the ADB, who are very much in favour of privatisation. I just look at Britain, which has been doing privatisation and PPPs probably longer than anyone, and they've still got very significant government businesses. And I mean, I wouldn't be at all surprised in 10 years' time, PNG still owns quite a number of important government businesses. That's why I think that even if you are going to privatise, you can't stop the program of SOE reform, and as members of the public, you can't stop demanding better service.
Okay, thank you. Richard Prebble, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Enjoyed your insights on SOEs and comments on the launching of Finding Balance, the Asian Development Bank's benchmarking report on the performance of SOEs in island nations. Thank you very much, and look forward to having you back in Papua New Guinea.
Well, thank you very much.
That's it from us in the studio. With me I've had Richard Prebble, who I called the last Postmaster General because he basically abolished the post. But the first Minister for State-Owned Enterprises in New Zealand, and he was speaking at a chamber breakfast on Finding Balance, benchmarking SOE performance in the Pacific nations.
And that's all we have for you tonight. For more information, be sure to visit MTV online. That's mtv.com.pg/business. Or to join the conversation, follow us on Twitter at Business PNG using the hashtag Business PNG. Until next week, have a pleasant evening. I'm Leanne Jarari, and this is Business PNG.